Good morrow everyone, Silvershire here, and welcome back to Palette Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. Today we're covering two Soulcalibur characters. For the first half of the video, we'll be discussing the woman who, on all levels except physical, is a wolf, Hilde von Krone. And after that, we'll be taking a look at the medieval Mr. Monopoly, Dampierre. Timestamp is on screen if you want to skip to him. But before we begin our analysis, here's a quick refresher course on who Hilde is and what we should be looking for in her character designs. Hilde is the Princess of Wolf Krone, a fictional Germanic kingdom in the non-fictional Holy Roman Empire. When the cursed sword Soul Edge unleashed the evil seed upon the world, Hilde's father transformed into a malfested monster and had to be locked away in a tower. That left young Hilde as the regent of her kingdom, and since this is a fighting game, it should go without saying that she spent more time on the battlefield than on her throne. Alongside her loyal soldiers and her cousin/husband, Hilde fights to protect her homeland from the forces of the Azure Knight, Nightmare, and hopefully find a cure for her father's madness. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Hilde's debut appearance in Soulcalibur IV is a 10 out of 10, and I'm not just saying that because it's silver and red, though that definitely helps. She's wearing a full suit of heavy plate armor, and I'm a sucker for the medieval knight aesthetic, so she's already off to a good start. This also sets her apart from most of Soulcalibur's women who tend to wear very revealing outfits, especially in Soulcalibur IV. Hilde adds some variety to the roster. Since she hails from Wolf Krone, it's fitting that her armor makes use of wolf imagery. There's a wolf on her shoulder, 3 wolves on her waist, and coolest of all, a wolf on the visor of her helmet. Though less obvious, she also has a flower motif. You can see them on her thighs and on the gold medallion at the top of her breastplate. These same flowers appear on the flag of Wolf Krone, and I believe they're meant to be lilies of the valley. These symbolize a ton of things ranging from happiness to youth to humility, but they're also extremely poisonous, so maybe this is meant to tie into the duality of warrior and princess. The bits of flowing fabric on Hilde's shoulder and lower back make her look regal, especially with all the gold details, and the asymmetry of her design complements the asymmetry of her weapons. Beyond the armor, Hilde has a somewhat unique face thanks to her beauty mark and her full pouty lips. As you'll see momentarily, you can totally change her hair and attire and she's still recognizable. I don't really know how to end this segment since I already gave it a score. So let's see the next costume, I guess. While her 1P emphasizes her warrior side, her 2P emphasizes her princess side. She's wearing a fancy, ruffly gown covered in ornate patterns, some subtler than others. There's no wolf imagery, but the Lily of the Valley motif is here in full force. The blue and yellow of her dress combine with the red of her hair to form a striking triadic color scheme. The blue and yellow are both very pale, so there's not much contrast. Usually that'd be a criticism, but I actually think it works well here. For comparison, look at Aurelia from Soulcalibur III. Her design is pretty similar to Hilde's, but her dress is more revealing, her jewelry is more obvious, and her color palette is more saturated. You get the sense that Aurelia wants to flaunt her wealth, power, and beauty in a way that Hilde doesn't. Hilde's clothing is clearly expensive, but in a subtler way. It's not as ostentatious or attention-grabbing, and that's great visual storytelling, because it shows you the kind of person that Hilde is. That said, I do think she could do with some sort of crown or tiara, just as a reminder of her royal status. When given the choice between this and her 1P, I'm almost always going to go with the 1P, but that's not the fault of this costume. 9 out of 10. Her Soulcalibur V 1P is similar to the last game, but it switches out the wolf and flower motifs for a bird motif. This is because she's joined forces with Siegfried's mercenary group, the Black Wind, which uses a griffin as its symbol. She's not quite as heavily armored this time around. There's more cloth, leather, and fur taking the place of metal. According to an artist's note, this was meant to convey that Hilde has been at this for a while and has needed to replace pieces of her armor with whatever she can get her hands on. That comes across in her color palette as well. She's still wearing silver and red, but it's a darker, duller silver, and there's a lot of brown as well. Speaking of being at this for a while, her face does seem a bit more mature, but not as much as I would expect after a 17-year time skip. Although I guess I should count myself lucky that Hilde is even in this game, because Bandai Namco is terrified of women over the age of 30. All in all, this is another great looking design and a logical evolution of her character, but I don't think it quite lives up to the pristine, wolf-themed armor of the previous game. Also, a 9 out of 10. Her 2P is inspired by a musketeer's uniform. It looks more French than German, but that actually makes sense given the lore of Wolf Krone and the history of Europe. Hilde's kingdom is said to be on the east bank of the Rhine, which is the river that separates modern-day France and Germany. That means that it probably belonged to the Carolingian Empire and then East Francia before it became part of the Holy Roman Empire, so it could have been influenced by Frankish culture as well as Germanic. 1607 is a little early to see this style of musketeer, but Soulcalibur has always been a bit anachronistic, and it passes the historical vibe check well enough. So, now that I've put my minor in history to good use, let's get to what you actually came to the video for. This costume has quite a distinct silhouette, mainly due to her hat, and it continues the griffin theme of her 1P. I think the musketeer angle was a neat direction to take Hilde. but it's a shame that neither of her costumes really look royal anymore. If I saw these two designs out of context, I would guess that she's a high-ranking warrior, probably nobility of some sort, but not that she's the leader of a kingdom. This is also her plainest costume in terms of patterns and textures. It's not boring by any means, but there's a lot of empty space. Her color palette is red, yellow, and black, which gives her some strong contrast. It might be a reference to the colors of the Holy Roman Empire's flag, which later became the colors of Germany's flag. This is my least favorite of her original 4 costumes, but it's still an 8 out of 10. Soulcalibur VI is a reboot of the series, so Hilde is young again, even younger than she was in Soulcalibur IV in fact. Characters in this game only have 1 costume each, so the designers tried to capture both her warrior and princess sides in a single design. That was a good idea, but I don't think they were very successful. Let's start with the positives. For one, she finally has a crown. It's nothing too fancy, but as discussed, that makes sense for Hilde. She's also wearing a fur-lined coat that befits a royal, but that's kind of where my praise ends. Her armor looks really thin and impractical, the wolf theme is less prominent, and this is her only totally symmetrical design, which makes it a bit less interesting. Her color palette is now golden red instead of silver and red. There's nothing objectively wrong with that. In fact, you could argue that it makes her look more royal, but it's not my personal preference. All in all, this design is just kind of generic. There are a dozen Fire Emblem characters who look just like this. I think most of the outfits featured in her concept art are better, especially this one in the bottom right corner. If you removed the helmet and gave her the crown from her final design, it would probably be a 10 out of 10. As for what we got, I think it's Hilde's weakest costume, but it still deserves a 6 out of 10. That just goes to show how great her overall selection is. Though she doesn't have any alternate costumes, she does get some alternate colors. Color 2 is silver and blue. This is a classic Knight in Shining Armor palette, and I think it works about as well as the default. 6 out of 10. Color 3 is copper and teal. It also removes her coat and makes her hair blonde. I really like the simplicity of this design and the contrast between the bronze and teal, though she could do with some pauldrons now that she isn't wearing a coat. 7 out of 10. Color 4 is red and black, and it uses the battle-damaged version of her equipment. It also makes her hair black and her skin a bit more tan. I'm a fan of edgy palettes like this, but I think they went a bit overboard with the battle damage. Her armor is just devastated, which makes it seem weak and fragile. It's like she was wearing eggshells into battle. 6 out of 10. Dampierre's backstory is largely a mystery, because it changes every time someone asks him. He styles himself as a respectable businessman, but in truth, he's a con artist who's done every shady thing you can imagine to climb his way to success. He's a thief, murderer, kidnapper, war profiteer, and other things YouTube doesn't like me to say. When the villainous Graf Dumas rose to power, Dampierre tried to ingratiate himself to the king, providing him with dangerous and exotic weapons to aid in his dark conquest. There's an untold amount of blood on Dampierre's hands, but the suffering of others matters little if he stands to make a profit. Did I mention he's a joke character? Yeah, he's this wacky woohoo Waluigi looking dude who fights by sneezing and falling over. Dampierre debuted in Soulcalibur Broken Destiny, the PSP port of Soulcalibur IV. His main distinguishing features are his top hat and mustache, which are the epitome of cartoon villainy. They also call to mind the image of a snake oil salesman. Both his hat and necklace depict a mustachioed frog with a crown on its head and a skull in its mouth. This is likely meant to reference the classic fairy tale of the Frog Prince. Dampierre is sort of the opposite of the titular character, as he's a slimy creature masquerading as a nobleman. His necklace also features the 4-card suit since he's a gambler. From the chest down, his outfit is super simple. He's just wearing a bodysuit with vertical stripes. This emphasizes his long, lanky legs, which he uses a lot during gameplay. His palette is mostly green and purple, which aren't quite complementary but contrast each other well. I have 2 main problems with Dampierre. The first is that he doesn't really fit Soulcalibur's aesthetic. As I mentioned in the Hilde segment, I'm fine with some anachronisms in Soulcalibur, but Dampierre doesn't pass the historical vibe check. He looks like a character from Gangs of New York when he should look like a character from the Tudors. My second problem has more to do with his lore than his appearance, though the two are connected. The writers don't seem sure of exactly what kind of character they want Dampierre to be. Sometimes they portray him as this affably evil goofball who isn't nearly as smart as he thinks he is and fails at everything he does. But other times they portray him as a genuine threat who puts on an air of incompetence to deceive his victims. Either one of those could be compelling concepts, but when you don't commit to one, you get instances of tonal whiplash like I mentioned in his story recap. His design totally leans into his comedic side, so it's hard to take him seriously. You mean to tell me this is the guy who traumatized Pyrrha for life by forcing her into servitude? This guy? 4 out of 10. His 2P seems to be a cross between Michael Jackson, Dr. Eggman, and Guy Fieri. I think I owe his 1P an apology, because it looks straight up medieval compared to this. Between the sunglasses and the bleach blonde mohawk and the pink jacket, this dude just doesn't belong in Soulcalibur. Even ignoring that, it's not a great costume. He has that frog symbol on his belt buckle, but that's it for evocative imagery. This design doesn't tell you much about Dampierre aside from the fact that he's a weirdo. The only good thing I have to say about it is that it makes consistent use of triangular shape language, which is associated with danger and aggression. Coincidentally, aggression is the emotion that I feel when I look at it. 2 out of 10. Dampierre's Soulcalibur V 1P is the same as in Broken Destiny. Since they don't take graphics into account, the same score applies. Dampierre does get a new 2P, but it's just a recolor and not a very good one. It's all red and pink, which is to say red and lighter red, so it lacks the strong contrast of green and purple. They didn't even change his hair color or anything to make it just a tiny bit more unique. And that lack of effort is especially egregious seeing as how he was a DLC character. You had to pay for this. 3 out of 10. And with that, we have ranked every single Hilde and Dampierre costume. Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.